Oh my gorgeous, gorgeous subconscious expert listeners. I don't know whether I'm quite ready for this interview. Me and Bex were just having a bit of a conversation before we started. I'll introduce her in a minute. I know I already have, but my God, the container that we had together, and I know we'll get into all the nooks and the crannies, but literally was the most magical time, the biggest breakthroughs I think I've ever seen, and really truly was like, oh, just a magical, magical experience. So I'm so excited. But welcome, Bex. How are you? Welcome to the podcast.
Oh my gosh, that just made me emotional. I was like, oh my God, we are going, we are going, we
We're
are
in
going.
30 seconds in.
Oh my gosh. It's like so huge. We were just talking about this, weren't we? About how absolutely wild like the past like 4 months have been.
Yes.
Incredible.
And we're going to get into all of the nooks and crannies um, throughout the whole of the podcast. And I can't wait to really kind of have a bit of a deep dive. I think it's a nice reflection for us too, as well as the people listening and
Yeah.
kind of understanding where you were. But let us know a little bit about where your business was, where your mindset, your subconscious was before we started working together.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting because I messaged you about this and we were speaking about it before as well. How when I was first starting to reflect on this, I was like, I literally can't even remember like what I was like before, who I was before. I think about myself like, say, I did Power Up in January and we started together 1-to-1 in February. So even like before that, I'm thinking back to like December time. I'm like, I feel like that space has been like 5 years.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible. But I was kind of like taking myself back to that moment in December and I was like, right, what actually was going on before? Because there has been so much shifts, like really in like the identity as well. Um, but kind of what was going on for me from a business point of view, I I was going through almost like I was right on the edge of this, like almost like this rebirth. I hadn't fully stepped into it. That's really what we stepped into. But so I was kind of at this place of really starting to let things go. I was really letting go a lot of things in the business, a lot of things I'd outgrown. Even like pre that kind of whole sort of last four months of last year, I was spending more time like going deeper with my brand. I remember I did like my first photo shoot, was really stepping into like becoming the Soulful CEO, was stepping into that version of myself. But I was almost just dipping my toe in. And as I started to like dip my toe in, then all of a sudden I started to unleash her a little bit. And then I realized how much actually my business I'd already outgrown to that point. And I specifically remember I did a launch around November, December time for a group program that I'd run. Like, I think that would have been like the fourth time I was running it. And I remember going to launch it and being like, this is so misaligned to like who I'm becoming and like who I'm stepping into. And it was kind of this moment in my business where so much was almost like happening quite fast at that point, with like the clarity of like really like what my brand was, who I was stepping into is who I was here to become. That then that offer and how I'd run it before, I was like, this is now really outgrown for where I'm going. So around that time, I was doing this launch and it felt incredible, but my kind of backstory, which is needed for what we worked through, my kind of like unique method, which I hadn't fully owned and stepped into, I started to bring into the launch, but then realized that was kind of misaligned to what that program was. So I was like, this needs to go for like where I'm stepping into. But now all of a sudden, I know I'm here to like own this method more, own who I am, really step into and own my movement. Like all of these concepts have been there for years, like bubbling along, and I was really stepping into it. But now I had the awareness. I was like, okay, this stuff is all really, I've really outgrown it. That was kind of, excuse me, that was kind of what was going on from a business point of view. But then there was a huge, and this was the big thing why we started working together. That was all happening. And I was like, great strategy from point of view. Great. I can work through that. That's kind of like my area, like rebirthing with business point of view. But then there was a huge thing coming up for me all around avoidance. And I remember this actually showed up a lot more in my personal life than it did in my business at that time. And I kind of, and again, of course, this was coming up as I was about to really step into this, like literally, of course it was. But I remember in my like personal life, it was just really, I was just being met with loads of like experiences, things that I couldn't ignore around kind of like this avoidance that I realized, and where I was keeping myself at this distance. And I really felt like I was, yeah, like kind of like avoiding things, but really a lot with relationships, kind of keeping that distance between me and other people. And I felt that a lot. And I always knew that was kind of there because a lot of it was through the grief and the trauma and the things I'd been working through. But it kind of got to a point where I was like, I can't ignore this anymore because of how this is showing up in my life. And I remember I started doing some more like somatic work around that time as well. So it was like, that was all bringing it through. So like, it was like, all of this was really coming to the surface, but I didn't really, at that point, I hadn't really felt it that much in my business.
Mm.
But the biggest thing there, before we started working together, I was like, I've always had such a strong vision of who my soulful CEO is and who I'm here to step into. And I kind of, because all this strategy stuff was shifting, I almost like couldn't unsee how like this avoidance stuff was like creeping up, how I could see that showing up in relationships. I had such a clear vision of who I was here to become as the soulful CEO, as the leader, like how I saw myself holding that space. And I was like, this is the gap. Like this is the gap there. I can see how maybe right now I'm kind of, it's not really showing up that much in my business with what I'm holding. But I was like, for who I'm stepping into and what I want to hold and how I want to be available and like see myself as that leader, I was like, this needs to be seen and this needs to be worked through. And I literally could not ignore this bubbling up. So
Yeah.
that's when I came into your
Couldn't
world.
unsee it once you saw it. And I think I remember you actually messaging me when she'd signed up for Power Up, and you were like, I've just listened to a podcast of yours, and like I've just had to sign up because it just feels like this is what I need. It was almost what you needed at that very moment, wasn't it? And I know that was
Yeah.
mid December that I launched that, and I think just kind of you
Yeah.
stepping into that first. I do remember you on the calls, and we weren't working together one to one at that point, but you were having these
Yeah.
like ahas and light bulbs and like,
Yeah.
ooh, at that point, weren't you?
And really big as well, like really big light bulbs. Because I remember I was actually in Cape Town. And I was like in Cape Town, I was really like living my best life there for a month, really embodying like that soulful CEO version of me. And then we were working through Power Up, and I was like, oh my God, these huge, huge light bulbs. And like, I don't, even at that point, I had no idea like what was about to unfold. And I don't even think this kind of what started off as that feeling like it was a bit of avoidance, how that kind of led to what we worked
What it
through.
did.
It was,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, let's kind of go into the avoidance, because I think that was pretty much the first thing that we started
Mm,
to work on, really, wasn't it? And a lot of it was coming down to, I'll let you speak into this, but it was almost showing up in your business to like not getting back to potential clients, or
yeah.
like not putting yourself out there. Like it was very much an avoidant to the fear of your success and the fear of you
Mm,
holding more and the fear of you having more. You were almost like, whoa, I can't take myself there, because if I go there,
yeah.
what who the hell am I? It was really into that, wasn't it, the belief?
Yeah. Yeah. Massively. And yeah, it was exactly how it was showing up like that. It was especially, I didn't really notice it with my one to ones and who I was with my one-to-ones, because I think I created the safety there. So
Yes. Yeah.
that felt very different. So I almost was in a place where I could see where it wasn't showing up, but then I could see how it was trickling into, especially the DMs. I found that a lot, and I felt, and it's so funny because on the outside no one would ever notice, but like with me, I was like, I would just feel that little bit of resistance of, oh, I'm just gonna like go for a walk and do that, and then I'll come back to it. And like just little things that I was always like, yeah, but it doesn't really matter, because it's not like I'm not coming back to people, but it was a sign of something so much bigger. And I think
Mm.
exactly as you said, there was a lot of fear in there around really who I was stepping into as a leader. I've like got a massive vision for my business and what I'm here to create with my movement. And it's like, I've always known that. So it wasn't even like the fear of success of like the next step. It was like, it was almost the fear of stepping into, wow, you're owning this movement. This is going to be huge. Like the bigness of how you see this and how you see this being like globally is freaking massive. And
Yeah.
like, I knew that first step was like I knew that when we kind of like unraveled that, it's like no going back. It kind of was
Yeah.
like that. It was like really like there, and I was like, the minute we go into this, like you're
Buckle
in
on
it,
it.
and you're unleashed. You're like in for a wild ride, and I was like, oh my god. So I was on that. I was like on that edge, and it was like it really did feel like it was so close to the surface. It felt like it was really like on the edge of like a catalyst for like everything,
Yeah.
like
And
rippling almost.
literally what happened then was
And it was.
the catalyst of everything.
No wonder I knew intuitively. I was like, Becca's gonna crack me wide open. I'm like literally going in for the ride of my life.
You were like, "Are you ready for this? Because I'm not sure." Like, I
I think
remember you saying that in the
I
DMs.
think I said that to you because I was like, I feel how big this is. And I know it's like it almost felt like it was so I remember feeling it was so close to the surface that it almost felt like I was right on the edge of things
Yes.
happening really fast.
Yeah. Yeah. And it literally, I think within 3 weeks of us working together, we were on that absolute trajectory, weren't we? You know, just from kind of uncovering that. And that was the first lot of timeline therapy that we did together, and I know you're very you're in that world as well, so it was very receptive. Like you said, you were right on the edge anyway. You were very aware, you knew what was going on, you knew more or less where it was coming from, and it was just kind of unlocking that.
Yeah.
And I think it was so strange, wasn't it, because you had this like movement and like huge concept in your head.
Yeah.
And like you said, it was kind of like bridging that gap of where you were to like what that was. But
Yeah.
everything happened so naturally from there. It wasn't even that you had to go, right, now I'll sit down and let's see how to make this movement come to life. Like
Yeah.
talk to us about what happened like from session 1 to like week 3, because it was literally that quick.
In those first few weeks. Oh my god. Yeah. And I think as well because these concepts around like the movement and like who I was as a Soulful CEO and what the movement was and what I wanted it to be, like that had been things that were like trickling in for like years, and it really had
Yeah.
been like pieces of the puzzle. And I think it, especially around January, right at the start, I remember like being in Cape Town, being like, this is all landed. Like what this is landed, but like exactly as you said, it was like unlocking me to step into like leading that. Like that really felt massive. And I think especially in those first few weeks when we went really deep in those sessions, I literally made a note of this earlier because I remember, and I'm pretty sure it was at that start, I remember having like one session, and I remember this actually kept happening, where I would kind of a lot of this around like the inner child work as well, like going back to
Yeah.
that. I remember really connecting to that version of myself and then coming in as my version now, being like, you're the leader that you always needed. And I remember having these huge breakthroughs, but then also like then at the same time be like laughing because I was like, oh my God, that's the mantra. Like that's the mantra of my brand. Like how crazy that it was like, I was like doing the work, but then like these elements of my brand and my mantra, because that's always been so deeply aligned. It was like, I was like connecting that through the work. So it was really, it really meant that there was kind of like the side of it, the mindset side, but like it really meant like I was really embodying almost like what the movement was, and I was embodying who I was. It connected that in it as well, I
Yes.
think.
Yeah, which I think allowed you to really step into the podcast and the launches, and I know we'll go on to talk about that in a moment, but like it
Yeah.
really allowed you to it was almost like you had your mission and your purpose and your drive back from the business
Yeah.
feeling so unaligned, which I know so many people go through, especially when you are doing a lot of subconscious work, because we're growing so much as
Yeah.
people. Things do start to feel unaligned because you're like the person, like literally you on the call, you're like the person who I was at the start of the year is not who I am anymore. And like, it's okay. It's okay to lean
Mm,
into the uncomfort of it not being aligned. But I think the more work we did on
absolutely.
you, the more you started to connect to, like, you were like, "Ugh, the message that I am giving is the message that I'm receiving for myself." Like, you were like, what?
It was so funny. And I was like, this is really powerful, because I'm like, that brand work had been done so deeply. And it is like, I'd continue to evolve that. But I think because the mindset connected it meant that I could then step into it even more deeply.
Yes. Yeah, which
Mm.
you started to do, didn't you? What were some of
Yeah.
the other shifts that started to happen around that time? Because I know there was a big shift that we created around the leadership and you really owning your voice almost as well, wasn't there? As
Mm.
that kind of came in tandem with what we were doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this showed up massively around the podcast.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it was really interesting. Like, I look back to like launching that podcast, and that is like hands down one of the biggest things I've done, because it was less about the podcast and it was more around me stepping into that, holding the space, being able to step into this is who I am, this is how I see stuff. But instead of from a point of, before, it'd always be on Instagram, like saying it on stories and that feeling like
Hmm.
really comfortable, etc., and like feeling like that was so comfy. Actually, now this was suddenly like stepping into, okay, you're saying all this, now this is you actually embodying being that leader and doing it.
Hmm.
um and boy, was that a journey. Oh my god. I think I'm literally like, oh my god, that podcast literally
She's reliving
sent
the
me.
podcast experience
I'm like
right
thinking
now.
about it now. I'm like, and it's so crazy because now it feels so different, and that
Yeah.
again shows the shift. But I don't really remember necessarily the actually what was coming up around the
The
mindset. I
leadership.
just
Yeah.
remember feeling like I just felt so much resistance.
Mm.
And it was the week leading up to when I was recording it. And also, we'll talk to this as well, because there was so many incredible things happening at the same time around this. But the week leading up to it, I just remember feeling so much resistance and almost being like, I don't know, like the depth of this. It just felt like it was such a big, there was so many like deep fears in there that was
Mm.
less about the podcast and me stepping into owning who I was and my voice and all of that sort of thing. And it, after that, it really was like this death and rebirth. And I think so much needed to crumble to have that
Yes.
rebirth.
Yeah.
Um, but the funny thing was, like, alongside of this, and this is why like things can all happen at the same time, like alongside that, before that podcast launched, I remember like fully being like, I came to a session, I was like, oh my god, I am actually like the Soulful CEO. I feel her, I am her, like there's no questioning, like I have such deep confidence in this movement and who I am, and like all of that was rippling. And then when I was planning the podcast, it wasn't even like this is just a podcast. Again, it was like it's almost like the podcast was the embodiment of the movement coming to life as
Mm.
well. Like it did feel so much bigger than the podcast. So that's why the fears and stuff were coming up. But when I was like creatively looking at how I was going to launch the podcast, like that in itself ended up leading to like a full rebrand. And
An
I was
office
like,
update.
oh my god, like I remember I was like, it started off, this is literally how my mind works. It started off as like, okay, how do I see the podcast? Like, what am I stepping into? What's the vibe? What's the energy? How can we create this experiential, like an experience of the podcast? So there I was with my like Canva, bringing everything to life. And then I was like, my God, I'm here as the Soulful CEO. I'm going to update my style. And then one weekend I was like, Beck, I've just redone my whole office. And I was like, now it feels like my Soulful CEO. I was like, I could just see these little bits where I was like, oh, like evolve that and evolve that. And it just, but there was like that identity piece that was like me like really embodying that version of myself. I think because then the podcast was really the tangible thing of me owning the
Mm.
movement and it feeling like it's more of a movement versus me just saying it's a movement. Like that really took it to like that next stage.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the moment that you almost knew that it was a movement, because right at the very
Yeah.
beginning of the whole like podcast and us talking about you launching it and where it was going to lead to with the launch that you were doing, it was very much just a podcast, right? And
Yeah.
not just a podcast, but you know what I mean. And then when
Yeah.
you started to like unravel that, you were like, no, like this is me holding the space for what I've always wanted to hold and how I've always wanted to do the business. And I think that's where like the
Mm,
catalyst of this huge identity shift came for you, because it was a podcast, but it was way more than that. Like it was
mm,
you fully owning, bringing people together. And I know you said like, I've got
yeah.
this down, like something's happening again, and like all of these like messages kept coming through, didn't they? And
Mm,
people kept saying things, and it was you like, wow, I'm now in the holding of that. And it was really creating the safety around that, wasn't it? And which we did a lot of work on during that time, both in session and in Voxer, of
mm,
you feeling safe to
yeah.
hold that, wasn't it?
Completely. And it was just that was just absolutely like just so needed because it did always come back to like the bigness of the movement. And I almost was like, not that I was putting it on this pedestal, but like it is big what I want to create. And I couldn't untell myself that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's so, because everything's so deeply like connected to what I've been through and how I want to help. It's like it's almost like I just really held that, like that feeling of, I don't know, it just felt so strong. So I think the safety
Mm.
was just so needed so that I could really kind of flourish in that versus kind of go back.
Yeah, and be in that.
Yeah.
And then from the podcast being out, we then kind of had like this huge identity shift, and that was really really happening. And the way that you were thinking about things and turning up to things and doing things, and like
Yeah.
even just in your voice notes I could hear just such a shift. I think you then started to see
Could you? I didn't
how.
even know that.
Oh
That's
yeah,
really
for
interesting.
sure. um
Oh
then
wow.
you started to see like, okay, how do I actually want to run the business now I am the Soulful CEO? And I think that's where we started to do more of the tangible um kind of like CEO operations, and you really stepping into that. What was the big switch
Yeah.
there, do you think?
I think it came off the back of creating that safety first. Because I think then when I felt safe, then it was like, okay, now we're in a completely different place. Like now we're in such a new place that I've never been in before. It was it almost then felt more exciting. I think after
Yes.
the podcast, that was really like it was really like a huge like death and rebirth. And I remember going, I was in Greece, like took that time to really integrate, and I was like, that's so powerful. So I gave myself that time to integrate and we really created that safety. But then afterwards I was like, now that's integrated, now I'm excited. Now it's like, now how can we see the business? How do I want to build this into what I know it's here to become?
Mhm.
And I think massively then around there was jumping into the podcast and doing things like the I Lead series that I
Yes.
did
Yeah.
and really bringing it to life in that way.
Mm.
And then it kind of trickled on to then kind of the operations and how I wanted to show up more for myself as well.
Yeah.
I think that was then huge. It was then like, okay, now you've stepped into this place with the podcast and who you're being and how you're using your voice, how the movement's coming alive. And then it's kind of then like, okay, now we look at how you're running things, how you're showing up for yourself even more.
Yeah. And I think like even when we looked at the running of the business, it wasn't this like, and now we need this and this. And we almost
No,
again went back to the movement and what you enjoy and what really lights you up. And, you had already created a very seamless way of bringing new, really aligned ideal clients in. And I know that was a big shift that you saw. And it was almost that realization of like, oh, like I don't need to be doing what everyone else is telling me to do. Like I could just literally do it the way I
Yeah.
want to. That was a big realization, wasn't it, for you?
Yes, it was huge. It was almost like, I think one of the biggest realizations I had around this was really trusting the feminine side of things. Because I always had this like masculine and the feminine like separate. I think we worked on that a lot as well, bringing
Yeah.
these two worlds together. And that was huge because that really was like the soulful and the feminine and the CEO and the masculine. And I'm always more in the masculine and the structure side of things. But I think bringing those two worlds together through the mindset work then almost like rippled on to then it almost like naturally happened in the business. Like you said, it wasn't like, oh, I need to do this. It was almost like because I was embodied more with these two worlds, it it kind of gave me the permission without even realizing to actually just be me with how I do things and let more of that like feminine, the personality side and like the energy like that come through, which like you always know is the thing that like works. Like I always like that's the thing, but it was like it was the safety in that as well.
Yeah.
It all happened naturally because it was all bringing me back to who I truly was, as
Yeah.
opposed to us being like, oh, we've got to like have this strategy for this. It's like it was like, oh, I'm really excited about this. I want to. I remember even jumping up and doing like free offer audits. Like
Yes.
that came through because I was excited to do it, which led to clients which were really soul
Mm.
aligned. So it kind of put me back to who I was, and then the excitement and the ideas that came in and that led, and then it
Yeah.
almost like the feminine then really worked with like the masculine side. That's what it
Yeah,
felt
and
like.
I think that was like that was the time where you started to see the shift more externally, wasn't it? Because we've been doing so much internal work, and when I say we've been doing internal work, we were
Oh
doing
my
the
god.
work. Every
We were like,
session she
there
was
was
like,
no
"Here
more,
we,"
there was no more work.
and I
I came in.
remember, yeah. Go on, go.
No, it's just like a funny side note. I remember when I first was coming to your sessions, I was like, I think one time I had like a jumper on, and I was like, by the end, I was wearing my little like crop top because
Bando.
I was like, we're ready.
We went there. The sweat was real. The tears were real.
Release it all.
um but yeah, like
Oh,
that's the I think that was the time where, because we'd done so much of the subconscious work and you had really been kind of grounding it into your day-to-day life and doing the practices with that as well, at that moment that we were just talking about, that was very much you then seeing it tangibly from an external point of view, which I think sometimes is so hard, isn't it, when you are doing a lot of mindset work.
yeah,
You can almost, and I remember saying to you, I can't remember quite when this was, but I was like, Bex, we're pausing the mindset work for now. Like, I really want this to come
yes,
into fruition from a tangible point of view, because I feel like it's about like everything's about to happen. And then you had like people signing up to your course before you'd even launched it. And like there was a lot of
yeah.
things that started to happen, but we almost needed to go, right, let me ground into this new identity. Just talk a little bit about that.
Mm, yeah, it's so interesting. I remember everything feeling like it was just happening really fast, and I almost didn't really know like what was happening. Like
Yeah,
I remember when you said that to me when we were like, okay, let's pause with the subconscious work. It was kind of like after the podcast
it
time
was.
when we'd
Yeah.
gone so deep with it all, and it needed that integration time. It needed to then pause with that to let everything in. And yeah, I just remember like everything felt like it just came from such an intuitive place, but obviously it was because of the work we had done unlock that. Um, and I remember just then having like open conversations in the DMs and being so excited about the group program that I was launching. But at that point, I think it was still like a few months' time or
Yeah.
something. Being so excited about it. When I was speaking to someone, I was like talking to them about it. I was like, "This is incredible," and I was like, "Holy shit!" Like I've just sold one of my group. I was like, I guess we're doing it on this day. I guess the launch
That's
is happening on this day
that.
because someone's just joined and we're good to go. And it was like things like that were happening, but like it just felt like things were coming in. And I was like, oh, there's another like little miracle, and there's another thing that came in, and it did start showing up like that. I even remember all the way to like my like day to day, I'd be like, oh, I've gone to the gym and I've done this, and like my days feel more spacious. So like, and again, it was like without me consciously thinking, I'm going to do this. And I think that's because the work was so, we went so deep that these things were just happening without me having to think, I'm going to do this, even though like the intention was always there, but now it was just happening.
Yeah, it was so subconsciously happening that you would like
Yeah.
drop into Voxer and be like, so this has just happened. Like, I don't know where it's come from, but that's me. Like, you know, it was just happening so naturally, wasn't it? That we didn't have to force a structure. We didn't have to force a way of doing things. Like you were just so embodied. And I think this is
Yeah.
why I found this container so powerful with you, is that you were just so embodied with the work that we'd done and the kind of identity work, and really letting go of that, and really, I think more than anything, like committing to listening to those old parts of you, which they
Yeah.
did come back every now and again, and we did
Yeah.
have to speak to them, we did have to like nurture them and send them love and all of that, but you were that committed to having this shift that it was so ease. There was just so much ease, wasn't there?
Mm.
Once you had then gone into the tangible, and then we let the
Yeah.
external run for a little bit, and then there was a bit of other subconscious work that we did. Like
Yeah.
it was just so powerful to see that come to life. How did it feel when you were just, it was just happening and it was just there?
I think a huge thing that helped me, and this is a massive thing in my business with everything, but a huge thing I think in those moments was I've always had this like the strong vision of like who I'm here to become as a leader, and I think that was so much more important than anything that felt like before things started happening. That was so much more important than focusing on any like fast fixes or anything. And it was like, I know I'm here to like shape my character. I want that to like, that's so important to me, that gave me huge trust. And I remember before things started dropping in, I was so much more committed to doing this work. And I did take a step back from um, some clients, etc., and things like that to
Yeah,
create the space. And it's what you were saying before, it's hard to have that trust sometimes. But I think when you have that vision of actually what I'm creating is so much bigger and what I'm stepping into is so much bigger, and who I am is this leader who's holding this space, it's like I always know that the other stuff will be a byproduct. Even if it gets a bit wobbly. But it was, yeah. And I think so when things started happening, it was just because it was coming purely from that place of I know where we're going with things. I know
yeah,
what I'm going to bring to life. And then it's like I was in that place of just being really open and receiving as well, that things kind of dropped in. So the
it
energy
did.
dropped
Yeah,
in a bit.
and I think like that was the power, and I just remember that I kept messaging you, being like, of course that's
Yeah,
happened.
so
Of
much.
course this has happened. Like, of course, because it was just inevitable with who you were being, how you were showing up, how you were like, you know, putting things out into the world. It was just like, of course she's signed up. Of course you've signed 4 clients before you've launched. Of course, like there was just
Yeah.
so many things, wasn't there? That was just like a real, of course, like I think that's all I said for like a good
You
week.
kept you kept being I remember it so much. You were like, of course. And I was like, I remember almost like trying to like question things because I was so used to before like questioning things. And you were like, of course. And I was like, huh. I was like, I
Yes.
just remember being like, this feels so I was like, this feels great. And you were like, and I was like, and then this just happened. You were like, of course. And I was like, huh. I'm just like, I just remember being so shocked so much, being like, this is just so like fascinated. I remember being so fascinated when like tangible things were coming, because I was like, it blew my mind how like the work that we did was shifting so much, like in my business, in my life, like just everything. And that's, I guess, like when your identity shifts to go, it goes everywhere. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
And it's
wild.
powerful, isn't it? And I said this on another interview with a client where, you know, it's so hard to commit to the subconscious work when there isn't tangible right in front of your face. Like you're not
Yeah.
sitting down and watching a webinar or learning XYZ to go and post this reel and do this hook. It's nothing like that.
Mm,
And I think it was the fact that you had so much trust in you knowing that it was the subconscious work that had to happen in order for that
Yeah.
next level? Because I think you've gone through that and kind of seen that allowed you to really step into this. What does
Mm.
business look like now? How's it feeling like now we've finished, and I miss you dearly, and
I
like I'm
know,
like
I'm
can't wait to
literally
come back
like,
from maternity leave, but like
forever.
what does it look like now for you, and how does it feel?
Well, kind of, so I take you back a little bit and how it's sort of shown up now, which is just absolutely wild. Like, so I launched my group program. Obviously, those few people like dropped in before, and like the launch, the way like I held the launch, and I think a massive thing here that I noticed, which was just really freaking cool, was like the creativity and like the innovation that I was bringing, and I felt like that came from a lot more trust. Like that was unlocked,
Mm,
so I was having more fun with what I was creating. I was like, oh, this is really cool with what I'm creating, and like this launch is really fun, and like everything I'm bringing to life, I'm like, oh, this is exactly how I've seen it. Like, and I think when I held that launch, I remember like I got so many messages around there around my energy and like how I was showing up, and I was like, exactly when you said about my voice, I was like, oh really? Because things were so embodied, I was like, oh, I can't remember how I was before. But then the launch, it was just it was so much fun because I was like, shit, like this is really freaking cool. Like how I've created it, how I'm showing up. Like the women inside were amazing. Like I was like, this is crazy. Like this should be paid. So I was like, this is wild. But then
yeah.
and then within the week of doing that, then like there was like 5 people in the group. And I was like, but that's just so freaking like so aligned. And I was like, and I remember you recorded a hypnosis track for me. And I remember laughing because I listened to it like partway through, and I was like, this all happened. I was like,
I don't need to listen to this
I
anymore.
am the one. I was like, this, because it was the one around the launch. And I was like, oh my God,
Yeah.
this is so wild. And a huge thing there was, yeah, like those basically like a sold out pretty much with like the women that I wanted inside. And then I was like in Italy on holiday. So I was like I was kind of like selling the back end of it in Italy, but then also like taking time off, being really present. And I was like, that's the big change, because
Mm,
it wasn't like I was doing this and I was like losing myself or being less than or anything like that. The big thing, which I think was just wild and been incredible with all the mindset work, is I was really stepping into like who I was here to become. And now the launch was there, and also now I'm on holiday and I'm living that life of like who I am. It was like, it just really felt like it was all of it, and it just felt like so freaking good. And I mean, I've just come back
mm.
from Italy like the other week, so we're still in it, we're still flying high.
We're still in the
um
magic.
we're still in the magic. But yeah, I think even now, like it's the point now where I'm like, wow, like this just feels really, it just feels so calm and confident with it, and I just feel so empowered. And it's kind of like now, like wow, like now, like what can we do with this?
What's
It's going
next?
back
Yeah.
to that place of like it being really exciting. And I
Mm,
think, yeah, it's just exciting now. Like now it's just like, wow, like you can achieve anything. And even now, like clients will drop into like my DMs like the other day, and it's just like it can be more like flowy. Again, it's not just the masculine, it's now we've brought in the other side. And I think the big thing with this is just, it's just allowing me to be me, like because I've
yes.
stepped into that. So now it's just feeling just a good, just feels so great. Just be
Yeah,
yourself.
just all really good. Because that really, like, if you actually, I mean, that sums up like the whole experience of the container is finding you again, wasn't it? Because it was just that you
Mm,
bringing back to you, and you are the magic, and you have the movement, and you are
yeah.
opening that to people. And the more you went back to you, the more we let go of and there was quite a few versions of you that you thought that you needed to be in order to have this successful business. And I know we did a lot of work around, that, and what that looked like. And I think the more we came back to you, the more power you had, creativity you had,
Yes.
like like people coming in, like it really was just so powerful to see that.
Mm.
You almost take off these old parts, wasn't it?
100%. That's exactly how it felt. It's like I knew who she was underneath. Like I had the vision of who I was here to
Mhm.
become. It was like the old and the new, and
Yeah.
it was like these layers. And I think like that's what initially felt so scary jumping in to your world, is because I was
Yes.
like, I know it's like a deep stuff that's like
Yeah.
right on the surface. But I knew, like I always knew at the end, I was like, it's gonna feel more freeing because I'm
Yeah.
just gonna be me. And like those, but like those layers were just the things that needed to move out the way for me to be unleashed
And
underneath.
here she is. And here
And
she
here
is.
she is.
If you could sum up the whole container in one word,
Oh
what
my
would that be?
gosh.
You can have a couple of words. I'll let a couple.
I know, I'm like Gemini rising. I'm like, can I have a sentence?
Can I have 12 sentences?
Can I have 12 sentences? Um, I would on, and I really don't say this lightly, but like I would honestly say life changing, because it makes me really emotional, because I think so much of what we did, like incredible with like the business and all of that sort of thing, but it was like so much of it really spoke to a lot of the grief I was holding, a lot of the grief, a lot of the trauma. And I think those were a lot of those barriers there that were there. And it unleashed, like, I literally felt like, and I think I messaged you this, it literally felt like it set me free from that. And like, that's what it felt like underneath. Like, I always had these visions of it being like this, like darkness here and like this light underneath. And I feel like we broke through that. Um, and it just ripples onto everything. I think when you can get to that version of yourself, it's like, it just, like, yeah, you just step into like on your path of like who you're here to become. So
And I think that
life
was
changing.
what it was so powerful to see, because it was I truly felt like we found you. And I think that was, and we've been in each other's world for like quite a long time. Like it's probably going on
Yeah.
3-4 years really, like of that
Yeah.
we've known each other on social media and all of that. And I think like just seeing you fully step into that for me was just so powerful. And like I was with you every step of the way. And I
Mm,
think just like allowing you to do that as well for me was like
mm,
I felt so special. Not that sounds weird, but like I felt so special. No, I felt so special in the fact that I got to experience that with you. That's where I was going with that. Like I felt so
yeah.
grateful that I got to experience you letting go of that. It felt
Yeah.
really, really amazing.
It was, yeah, it's just, it's completely changed. Like, that's why I say it's life changing. Like, I really feel like this sounds really deep, but like, I really feel like it's like set me free. Like, I
Yeah.
really feel like that was like so much of this weight was holding me down for so long in business, but in my life, like all of this was kind of getting to this point where it's like you're going to stay in this or you're going to break through. So yeah, it was just absolutely incredible. And I think when you unleash that, all of a sudden you just see it in all areas. And I think that was what has been like incredible, is seeing it
Yeah.
just, it's just me. So we're seeing it everywhere, and that ripple on
Domino,
is
yeah,
incredible.
domino effect
Yeah.
everywhere. Yeah. Oh my God. I just love it. I knew we'd go longer than 20 minutes talking about this.
No, I was like
I'm
20
like,
minutes, you kidding?
but let's have a little chat into what you do and the movement and everything that we've kind of been speaking about. I know I've
Yeah.
already introduced what you do, but let the listeners know what you're here for, what you're here to do.
Mm, absolutely. So I say my title, although be in my world long enough and we know that the titles don't really matter. We break free, but I'm a spiritual business mentor, brand strategist, and program strategist. Our movement is all around becoming the Soulful CEO. That's our movement, and it's really about empowering you to become the leader you always needed, and equipping you with those strategic tools to build your movement, to create soul changing experiences, for you to step into that version of yourself, but for you ultimately to like spread more empowerment and healing through the
Mm,
world.
mm.
So everyone I work with and everyone in my world, they are the yoga teachers, the healers, the the breathwork teachers, they're all in this world, the astrologers, tarot readers. And a lot of my clients is they've all been through huge things in their life. Very much linked to like my story and things I've been through with trauma and grief and things like this, which led me to like that work.
Yeah.
So now it's really about, oh, I feel like it's It's repeating back to me. Um,
Um,
so now really it's about helping them step into who they're here to become as a soulful
mhm.
CEO, and really empowering them to step into that space, and create and bring alive soul changing experiences and their own movement.
I love that because I think there are so many people in that space that like are here to create a movement and
Mm,
help more people. And I think I fell into this as well. Like you almost fall into like, but it has to be this way, and then I have to do it that,
yes.
and this is how it has to
Yeah.
be, and that's how I have to speak about it. And like, what do you find like the biggest resistance that comes up for people like before they've worked with you? Where are they
Mm.
in like the frustration of things?
They are massively like to what you just spoke to there. They have before, they've probably been in their business for a few years, so they've done the whole trial and error. And what I always find is when they started their business, like they really started it from this soul place of what they've been through and what their purpose is. And like that's incredible. But then what I noticed is a few years in to their business, often they kind of like lose themselves in the noise, and
Mm,
especially a lot of the way that I work really blends like spiritual alignment with strategic wisdom. It very much is like grounded in the soul, leveraged in the strategy. So a lot of the things that I find with my clients is that soul part has kind of taken the backseat, and they're kind of leading their business from a strategy point of view, but through that they've kind of lost who they are. And they are
mm,
kind of boxing themselves into, I've had a client who's like, am I a yoga teacher? Am I a health coach? Like trying to box themselves into being one thing or the other,
mm,
or strategies that kind of dim down their like vibiness and their personality and their uniqueness. So it's kind of blended them all to the same. And then when we work together, we just like flip it all. I think the biggest thing is coming back to leading with soul, because like when you lead with soul, like that's when like you reconnect back to what you've been through and who you are, and you really like that's when you step into who you're here to become as the soulful CEO, the piece that lands is then the movement of what you're here to create. And then
mm.
all of a sudden, like it mirrors my own story as well. But like then all of a sudden, it's like your brand shifts, like how you
Oh, yeah,
rebrand your
yeah.
marketing, your soul clients, like all of that then ripples. So it's almost like they've been doing it a bit backwards to start with. And then we like
Mm.
flip it on their heads, and then everything is really aligned and they step into who they're here to become and running it their way.
I love that. And I think that's so much more aligned with how they want to run the business and what
Yeah.
that looks like, isn't it, as well?
Yeah, massively. Like they kind of get to this point as well where it's not really how they're running the business isn't working for them, but it's also
Mm.
like they hit a cap with their business as well. And they're like, if I carry on like this, most people, they kind of resist that anyway, because they know it's misaligned and they know they're putting themselves into a box. And I think as well, a lot of my clients, they are really creative, and they do have like different like modalities like the yoga and the tarot and the like
Yeah,
healing, because all of these things have really helped them, but yet they're only like choosing one. So it feels like part of them is missing. So they kind of get to that point where it's like, there's this huge part of me that I'm not bringing to
pop
people I want to
into.
help. And
Yeah.
so it's really kind of re- restructuring it and creatively, like as well, creating it so you can be all of that, but making it make sense from a brand point of view as well.
Yeah, because I think that's where people go not wrong necessarily, but it's like, let me do everything for everyone and anything because I just
Yeah.
love it all. That it, like if you are playing into that and you don't have the strategy, which is why I love that you do the both. Like you get lost as well, like on both ends, can't you?
Yes, yeah, massively. Exactly. And you can definitely go in one or the other. And I think it's that's why it works so powerful with the two together. I think the soul is so needed, like that part of connecting back to who you are and your movement. All of a sudden, that's gonna like without a doubt that will probably like reposition someone anyway to be
Yeah,
more them. And then
yeah,
the brand is so much more powerful. But it's like without them connected, it's like people, and that's so true. Like people will have the soul part, but then they're like, how do I bring this to life? Or the strategy part, but it's a bit disconnected.
missing
But
it all.
actually, like,
Yeah.
yeah, when you lead your soul and leverage your strategy, it's like it's the magic.
I love that phrase. Lead the soul, leverage the
Lead
strategy.
with soul, leverage with
So
strategy.
good. So, where can people
Yes.
find you? Where can they learn more about you? Obviously, we've talked about the podcast, but let us know where they can go to have more of you.
Have more of me. Just come on over to Instagram.
Yeah.
That's the main place I am. And the podcast over there as
Yes.
well.
Amazing. I'll pop both of those in the show notes as well so you can click through. But Bex, Bex.
Ah.
What a journey we've been on.
What a
I've
journey.
loved having the time to reflect on this
Mm.
for us as well as the listeners. We're secretly done it for ourselves. No, we
Yeah,
haven't.
I know. I'm like, oh, there's listeners at the end of it.
Oh,
No.
sorry. No, but I think it's just amazing because
Mm.
there are so many other people going through that identity shift or knowing that they're on the cusp, and it's like
Yeah.
knowing that it's them, that you're going to set you free and you're going to set your business free from doing the work. So thank you for sharing
Yeah.
our time together and sharing your story. And I love you and I love seeing you flourish. And thank you for being a one-to-one. That's all I've got to say.
Oh my God. So honestly, thank you so, so much. Like I can't even, I feel like even what we've spoke about doesn't even like touch
Touch the
even the
surface.
depth of
No,
what we've gone through. But hands down, like life changing. That's the word, life changing. Absolutely
no,
incredible. Thank you
I
so
love that.
much.
Thank you for coming on and thank you everyone for listening. I'll see you on the next episode. Mwah.